Thank you, God, for this day that you have given us. Thank you that we have church. We can come together to have fellowship, to encourage one another, to learn from you. And my prayer, God, for this class is that as we get to know you, God, we're not just getting to know information about you, but we're getting to know your heart so that we know how to apply, we can apply the information in a compassionate way to love people the way you have called and commissioned us to love. That's my hope for this class. And no one here is exempt from not serving you. It's exempt from serving you because as long as we're on this earth, you have called us to make disciples. So no matter what stage of life we're in, there's always something new to learn because you have called us. And for that, we just want to acknowledge that. We want to say thank you for giving us the opportunity. We want to ask that you then equip us, God, to however you want to equip us in the personalities and giftings that we have so that we can do your work. Just want to lift up this class to you, God. Thank you so much. In Jesus' name, amen. We're doing this talk. Peter has, this is the first lecture, not this current one, but the very first one I did. So if anyone needs that, he has some copies. We're continuing where we left off 3 weeks ago on the subject of postmodernism. Before I start, does anyone here remember what we talked about 3 weeks ago? Or does anyone here have any comments about postmodernism that they know? Anyone? If you don't remember, it's okay. If you don't have anything to say, it's okay. That's why we're here. But just in case, does anyone have any understanding of what postmodernism is, would like to share with us? Okay, there's a lot of material today, so hopefully I can get through it. Let me get going then. 1 Chronicles 12:32 says, "Men of Issachar who understood the times and knew what Israel should do." These are people who understood their times. They understood the culture, and they knew what they needed to do in terms of serving and promoting God. So in the same way, we need to understand our times. We need to understand our culture today, not yesterday. Yesterday's finished, and because we need to know what's going on, how people think, what their mindsets are, so that we can be more effective missionaries. So we talked about 3 periods last time. I'm not going to go through in detail because we already did. I'm going to run through it real quick. We talked about the pre-modern period, the modern period, and the post-modern period. Now, let me just say that there are definite boundaries in all 3 periods. In other words, those periods have a time frame to them, okay? And there was a definite shift from one period to the next. However, I would say that as I look into today's culture, all 3 of these mindsets, mostly modernism and postmodernism, but all 3 of these mindsets are here today, okay? Although today, people would say that most of our mindset or the culture, maybe not in here, maybe not the church, but much of our culture is what we call a postmodern mindset. Some people actually think that the postmodern era is finished, and we have shifted to what we call a post-Christian mindset. But let's talk about this real quick. In a pre-modern mindset, art, literature, and philosophy glorified God. The supernatural world exists. Ghosts, demons, angels, people prayed a lot, superstitions, all that stuff was good. God revealed himself to mankind. In a modern mindset, the shift, art, literature, philosophy glorified man. Man became the center. There's a rejection of God. There's a rejection of the supernatural. Now, just want to say that just because they reject God doesn't mean that they don't think God, they say God doesn't exist. They believe that he exists. It's just that they acknowledge God's existence. It's just that God left us alone. He's in the sky somewhere. And now, it's because the modern mindset is very scientific, right? It's very rational. We use our reason. We use science to discover God if we want to, but we have to use our own faculties, our own willpower, and determination to find out truth. At least truth still exists. Postmodernism, that shift that happened in the early 1900s, is a reaction against modernism. There are many definitions of it, but the most simple definition I can give is that it's a reaction against modernism. It's the opposite of modernism. So there's this word called deconstruction, okay? They're gonna deconstruct modernism and reconstruct something new called postmodernism. So there was this philosopher by the name of Jacques Derrida who came in the 1930s who coined his term deconstructionism. And basically, the term is all about dismantling the modern mindset, right? How does that impact the church? Well, when it comes to the church, as you talk to some people, some of my friends, right, who are now maybe in their 40s and their 50s, 30s to 50s, around there, a lot of them don't walk with God anymore. They grew up in the church. What happened is that they've been influenced by this. They have deconstructed their Christianity. The building that they have built through science and reason by reading the Bible, right? This is the truth that we depend on. This is what we had discovered by hermeneutics, art of interpretation, science and art of interpretation. This is what we get. We have now deconstructed this, and we're in this process of reconstructing a different religion based on our personal desires, our own personal preferences. Now, God is up to my own interpretation. I have a lot of friends who grew up in a church that are in that state of mind. Now, the two predominant mindsets I want to talk about today, then, is modernism and postmodernism, because that's what's happening the most. We talked about a lot of different attributes of qualities of these three, or these two mindsets. I'm going to talk about three of them real quick. So in modernism, there is what we call the meta-narrative, which is a grand story, right? This is a grand story. The Bible is a grand story. Truth is absolute. Truth exists. Truth is universal. And because truth is absolute, truth is universal, right? We're dependent on one book. Truth is then objective. We can discover truth outside of ourselves through science and reason and logic. All we have to do is study. The reaction against modernism, right, which probably started 40, 50 years ago, depending on what expert you read, is that they don't have meta-narratives, but they have narratives. Individual stories count. It's not a grand story, right? It's your individual story. If you grew up in Saudi Arabia, it's no fault of your own that you grew up with the Quran, not the Bible. That's your individual story. Truth, then, is not absolute. It's relative. It depends on yourself, what's within, your own interpretation, or what your community taught you. If I grew up in Japan, chances are, I'm either nothing or I'm a Buddhist. That's what my community taught me. No fault of your own that you're not a Christian. You've just never been taught Christianity. Therefore, all truth is relative to where you come from. Because it's relative, it's also subjective. It's created from inside of you. It's not discovered through science and reason outside of you. There's no logical process to discovering truth. It's whatever you want it to be. It comes from the inside. Okay, so let me just say that, before I go on, let me just say that we're going to focus entirely on postmodernism. Again, there are some people that believe that we've moved past the postmodern era and we're into post-Christian era today, which means that people don't even consider the Bible, in their daily decisions and how they live. They don't even consider the Bible. But I would have to say, even if we are in a post-Christian culture, I would say that that's influenced or impacted by postmodernism. Okay, so we do have that in us. So I would also say that postmodernism has both good and bad. If you talk to a person like Josh McDowell, the apologist, he'll say it's bad. If you talk to Mark Shiraki, who's a pastor here, he'll say, in the past, he'll say it's bad. If you talk to Alex, one of our pastors here, he'll say it's good. He told me that this week. So there's good and bad in postmodernism. I'm going to focus on the bad part. Basically, modernism, I would say, is still closer to the Bible. Why? This is what I mean by bad, right? Because truth can still be discovered, right? Universal truth and absolute truth still does exist. Okay. But we're going to focus only on the bad of postmodernism, but I don't mean to disrespect those, that believe postmodernism is good, and because there are some good in it. Let me continue with reading you a story that I found. It represents postmodernism and modernism. Here it is. Abigail was raised in a non-Christian home, but a very loving family with strict rules. A good student with excellent grades, she went off to college at the age of 17. During her junior year, she had a glowing Christian roommate who led her to Jesus. Abigail got involved in church where she met a fine Christian young man named John. 2 years later, she presented her parents with their first grandchild, Veronica. Life couldn't have been any better. But when Veronica became a teenager, things began to change. Abigail and John's first daughter seemed to be rejecting many of their values. They were disturbed but continued to pray for Veronica and were relieved that despite those subtle changes, Veronica never got involved with drugs or alcohol, but was a rather well-adjusted, responsible young lady who did well in high school and got accepted to a fine 4-year university. That's where she met Stephen. "You'll love him, Mom," Veronica declared, calling from her dorm room at school. "He's a really sweet and brilliant guy, not to mention he treats me like a queen." Abigail smiled. "I'm so happy for you, darling. So when did we get to meet him?" "Actually, when we are both hoping that we could visit for the holidays. We can't be there for long because we'll have to visit his parents also, but he really wants to meet you and Dad." "That's great, honey. We want to meet him. Just let us know. We'll get the guest room ready." Veronica hesitated. Okay, Mom." Taking a deep breath. "Is the guest room really necessary? I was thinking we could just stay in my room together." Abigail's eyes opened wide. "Don't be silly. You can't do that. It wouldn't be right." "I thought you'd say that, Mom," Veronica responded. "I'll explain that to Stephen, how you and Dad feel about that sort of thing, and he'll understand since this is your house, and he'll respect your house rules. So don't worry, Mom. We'll stay in separate rooms while we are there." Abigail's heart pounded. "What do you mean, while you are here? Are you trying to tell me you intend to sleep together while you are somewhere else?" "We already do, Mom. We're in love. That's what people do when they're in love." Abigail interrupted. "I expect you to respect the morals and values that we taught you when you grew up." "I do, Mom," Veronica countered. "That's why I agreed that we would sleep in separate rooms while we are at your house. But at Stephen's house or at school, it'd be different." Abigail shook her head. "Are you trying to tell me that Stephen's parents don't care if you are in the same room when you are at their house?" "No, Mom, they don't. Not everyone shares your values on that sort of thing, you know." Abigail shook her head. "I know," wiping tears from her eyes, "but I certainly thought you did." Veronica responded, Not everything is as certain these days as your days, Mom. In many ways, I share you and Dad's views, but the internet has opened my eyes to people from all over the world. And these are people that go to my school, and they are good people. They just have different values that you taught me, Mom. Their values are not wrong, and they are not wrong. Mom, I respect you and Dad's values. I respect the both of you. But one thing I want you to know is that I have grown. I have evolved. I am different now than I was 2 years ago. So please understand, Mom, that you have your value system and I have mine. The fact that they are different doesn't mean that one is right and the other is wrong. That's postmodernism right there. And it doesn't mean we can't respect each other's opinions. In fact, that's the whole point, isn't it? We need to respect and honor differing value systems. Yours, mine, everyone else's. We need to honor differing value systems as being equal to our own. Anything else would be intolerance. Can't you just try to understand that, Mom? That mindset right there is very typical of a lot of people that I have spoken to and ministered to. You'd be surprised by this, maybe not. Actually, a lot of these people are in churches. So, it's important to know that in a postmodern mindset for world missions, because in over 80% of the world, there are two distinct cultures between adults and youth. When I say adult, I'm talking about the adults that came from a modernist time, so they have a more modernist, logical, rational, scientific mind, and youth, right? They're kids who are more postmodern, who take a buffet of different ideas and create their own ideas. Now, when I say youth, I'm not talking about necessarily about teenagers, because remember, all these postmodern books were written about 15, 25 years ago. So at that time, they were teenagers, but most of these people are now probably in their 30s and 40s. A lot of them are struggling with their faith. So there's two distinct cultures between adult and youth. Let's illustrate this using language. We did last time. The first one is tolerance. The word tolerance means two different things between youth and adults. Tolerance, traditional tolerance means putting up with someone's beliefs or values you do not agree with. I don't like the fact that you smoke, but I tolerate that. I can still be your friend. I don't agree with it. Postmodern tolerance means all beliefs, values, and lifestyles are equal. Okay? We already talked about that, so I'm not going to go more on that, continue on that. But second word in language would be truth. This is where we left off last time, okay? Truth. So truth has two different meanings in at least 80% of the world. Truth to adults is discovered, it's outside of yourself, and it's objective. Truth to youth is not discovered outside of yourself, but created within. All truth is personal and subjective. As we've seen from this story, Veronica represents the second part. So how do you respond to the false beliefs of tolerance and truth in today's postmodern culture? I'm going to talk about some nuggets. I'm going to ask for interaction. Here's where Sunday school, I'm not preaching here. It's more Sunday school if you guys want to help me interact. Here's a question I have for you guys. A question of tolerance. How much can you tolerate? I'm giving you what you call nuggets, right? Nuggets, like little ideas on how you can talk to people who have a postmodern mindset. See, everybody everyone has a value system. Everyone can tolerate things up to a certain point. But at a certain point, they have a boundary. They can't tolerate anymore. They just don't realize that. So when people are saying, you have to tolerate me and accept me for who I am, no matter what I believe, you have to figure out that even they might have something that they're super against, right? So no, you don't have to tolerate everything that they say or that they purport to believe. This is what I would do for a postmodern mindset. I would give them an existential shock. What do I mean by that? You figure out where that person's value system is, where their limit is, their limit of what they can tolerate, and you shock them by something that's in existence. You shock them by something that they actually can't tolerate. Okay, so for example, when I say shock, you have to say something outrageous, right? Like, is it okay for me to take a little baby and chop the baby into pieces and give it to people? I mean, if they value little babies, which some people, by the way, here in our culture do not, if they do, that would be an existential shock, right? If it's talking to a father who has a teenage daughter and he has a postmodern mindset, is it okay if introduce your daughter to O.J. Simpson and have them date? Maybe not. Existential shock. How about this one? Remember this? 2010? This Indonesian kid from Sumatra. They gave him cigarettes, first cigarette, when he was 1.5 years old. He became addicted to cigarettes when he was 2 years old. He smoked 40 cigarettes a day. And when they tried to take it away, threw temper tantrums. So they just kept on feeding him cigarettes. Tried to wean him off when he was 5 years old, but then he got addicted. He filled that void with food and was 52 pounds at the age of 5. 52 pounds. In Indonesia, parts of it, if you're from Indonesia, you might disagree with me. It's what I read. I have Indonesian friends. Parts of Indonesia, it's okay for children to smoke. Many kids, as young as, well, this kid was 1.5 years old when he first smoked. Many kids that are below age of 10 begin smoking. Their parents give them cigarettes. If you're a true postmodernist, if you really, really believe in that, you would say that you're not offended by this picture. It's absolutely okay. But if you're a postmodernist who's not really true to postmodernism, you will actually get offended by this picture. And that's an existential shock. You figure out what the person can tolerate, and you shock them with something that's in existence. How do you respond to false beliefs of tolerance and truth of today's postmodern culture? The question of truth. Can all truths then be equal? First of all, what is truth? Does anyone here know what truth is? Because if we have a culture that believes all truths are equal, right? Or we're vague about the definition of truth, then why are we even preaching the Bible? The Bible is just one truth out of many. It's no different from the Quran. What is truth? Okay. Backed up by facts and what I observe, I like that definition. I agree with it. I think a postmodernist would not agree with that definition, but I like that definition. I think it's correct. A postmodernist would say that's a modernist definition of truth. Thank you, Abe. Anybody else? Something that doesn't change. Okay. Anybody else? Truth is what corresponds to reality. Okay. Here's some simple logic. Law of non-contradiction. What does that law state? Simply stated, A does not equal non-A. In other words, A does not equal B. A cannot equal B. Either I am standing right here, right now, or I'm not standing right here, right now. It's either raining on my head right now or it's not raining on my head right now. I'm either talking to you right now, I'm not talking to you. I'm either in a red car right now, I'm not in a red car. I can't be both at the same time. It's very important. Truth, by definition, is exclusive. Truth, by definition, is exclusive. So let me think. When it comes to religion, then, when people are saying all religions lead to the same God, let's say there's Buddhism, let's just take three of them, Hinduism and Christianity. They're saying, no, they're all the same. They all lead to the same God. How would the law of non-contradiction apply to that? Yeah, they can't. Thank you. One's A, one's B, one is C. They all are exclusive at their core. They might have some similarities, like don't steal, don't kill, but at their core tenets are exclusive. So here it is. Thank you, Kenny. They are not equal. They are all either wrong or one of them is correct. One of them is superior, but they all can't be true because of the law of non-contradiction. Okay, let's go on. Relativism says all truths are equal. This is because postmodern tolerance says that truth is relative to the community one comes from. Therefore, there is no absolute truth. There is not one abiding, objective, universal truth that all follow. Here's what Abe gave his definition, is that he gave a good definition, and this is, but the postmodernist has a different idea. The relativist contradicts himself when he says truth is relative. There was this guy, I was working at Starbucks. My first job when I got out of seminary was to work at Starbucks because I was planning a church. It was humiliating because you get out of seminary, you get an MDiv, and you're working at Starbucks as a barista getting paid minimum wage, right? I have an MDiv, and like in my 30s, and people think that I'm what are you doing working as a barista? But it was what God called me to do, so I did it with happiness and joy. But I remember evangelizing to one of my customers, and there was this one time when no one was around, and I started evangelizing to him as I was working. I remember he shouted out, he goes, "David, I like what you said, but truth is relative. There's no absolute truth. There is no absolute truth. All truth is relative." He said that to me. Here's my response to him. I said, "Can you say that again, but slower, please?" I did this to him, and I have to apologize. I felt bad afterwards for hurting his feelings. But I said, "Can you please repeat that really slow, please?" And he said, "I said, all truth is relative." One more time. All truth is relative. I go, "Don't you think that's an absolute statement you just made?" You're using language to try to win your argument, David. I'm not trying to use anything. I'm just giving you a reality. By the way, I'm sorry if I offended you. You want to try to keep your bridge with him, right? I am, but I'm not really sorry. Okay. Religious pluralism then says all religions lead to the same God. Here's a Hindu story of 6 blind men and an elephant. Anyone here heard this story before? It's used in the universities a lot, especially the philosophy classes. This is where teachers who are atheists use this to promote relativism, promote that absolutes do not exist. They'll say something like this. Here's a poem by John Godfrey Saxe about the 6 blind men and an elephant. It illustrates what the professors teach. Here it is. It was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined, who went to see elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, and once began to bawl, God bless me, but the elephant is very much like a wall. The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, oh, what have we here? So very proud and smooth and sharp. To me, this mighty clear, this wonder of an elephant, it's very much like a spear. The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk with his hands, thus boldly up and spake, I see the elephant, it's very much like a snake. The fourth reached out an eager hand and felt about the knee. What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain. This clear enough the elephant is very much like a tree. The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, ooh, the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can, this marvel of an elephant is very like a fan. The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, then seizing on a swinging tail that fell within his scope. I see, the elephant is very much like a rope. And so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion exceeding stiff and strong. Though each was partly in the right, all of them were kind of wrong. What they're saying is that each of these people have a little bit of the truth. So depending on what you think about religion, they'll say, well, every religion has a little bit of truth. They don't have all the truth. They don't have the whole picture. They don't have the big idea. They cannot see the whole thing. They only have a little bit, like the blind man with the tail. They only have a little bit. And so because they have a little bit, you who is a Christian, who's wearing a Christian t-shirt right now, you only have a little bit of the truth. How do you know that the Muslim guy who lives in Africa or the Middle East, who has the Quran, he has some truth too? Your truth is not better than his. His is not better than yours. You should tolerate each other, accept each other, because your truth is equal. And so when you're a kid who grew up in a church and you've only read the Bible, you don't know anything else, and you go to the university and you have a very kind professor who teaches that, it kind of messes with your mind. If you're not, you don't think clearly, I'm saying. But how do you respond to that, really? How do you respond to that? Anybody? You only have a little bit of truth. You don't have the big picture. First, I think I would respond to by the narrator, by the way. He has the big picture, doesn't he? The narrator actually has the absolute truth. The narrator, the person who's reading the story, is actually telling you the whole picture. He's telling you the grand story. He's not telling you an individual story of each blind man. He's telling you that he can see the whole thing. So it's possible. It's possible that Peter is a Christian and he only has a little bit of the truth, maybe because he hasn't really finished reading the Bible yet, so he has a little bit of the truth. But it doesn't mean that that little truth doesn't need to be objective. It doesn't mean that it's relative. Because in fact, if you have a little truth that you've discovered outside of yourself from God, God revealed that to yourself, if it's objective, wouldn't that encourage you to want to be objective and discover more truth? To figure out what the entire picture is of the elephant and not just one? Okay. All religions lead to the same God. That's religious pluralism. How might the law of non-contradiction refute that? Let's try to figure this out together. With respect to God, let's just say we're using the law of non-contradiction, okay? With respect to God, different religions and different philosophical systems have different ideas of who God is. Remember, I said truth by definition is exclusive. They might have some ideas about God that are the same, but the major religions of the world and cults are all different at their core. So let's look at it. Judaism, Christianity, Islam are all monotheistic religions. They believe in one God. Hinduism is a polytheistic religion. They believe in 330 million gods. That's a contradiction, right? Either the first three are correct or Hinduism is correct, but all of them cannot be correct, or they could all be wrong. Salvation. How does the law of non-contradiction apply to that? Let's look at just Christianity. Let's look at two of them, Christianity and Hinduism. Christianity teaches that the soul spends eternity in hell or heaven after one dies. Hinduism teaches that the soul reincarnates into another form after one dies. Both of them cannot be correct. One of them can be correct, right? And they could, but both of them cannot be correct. Both of them can actually be wrong. Let's continue. How might the law of non-contradiction apply to salvation as how it's achieved? In Islam, salvation is achieved by submitting to Allah. The 5 pillars of Islamic faith. We'll go through that once we dive into Islam. Even in the Islamic religion itself, there are different doctrines. Some would say a jihad is the only sure way. So even in Islam, there's a disagreement on how to achieve salvation. Buddhism is eliminate your desires. We all have these cravings, right? Called desires, and that's what gets us in trouble. That's what causes suffering. The only way we can have nirvana, which is absolute nothingness, is to eliminate those desires. I used the law of non-contradiction to lead a Buddhist monk to Christ in a Buddhist temple. I used it. It was just a gift that God gave me. I used the law of non-contradiction to lead him to Jesus because I pointed out to him, about this eliminating desire. There's a better way. Christianity, right, according to Ephesians 2:8-9, is a free gift. Can't do anything. Either all three of those things are wrong or one of them is superior, right? But they can't all be true. Let's go on. We're using language to illustrate postmodernism. Okay, the next word is judgment. In most of the world, the word judgment has two different meanings. 80% of the world. Adults, certain things are morally right and wrong as determined by the character of God. To the youth, those who I would say are 45 years old and younger, there is no right to judge another person's viewpoint. One of the most quoted verses in today is Matthew 7:1. Anyone know what Matthew 7:1 is? And you know who quotes this verse? Christians. Non-Christians don't know the Bible. It's Christians with the postmodern mindset that have quoted this verse, that have told me this as a pastor, that I'm too strong. Stop it, David. You're too strong. You gotta don't even stand up when you preach. Maybe you should sit on a chair so that you're not authoritative. I think that there's some wisdom to that. Does anyone have a Bible? Yeah, thank you. Here, let me get it. Do not judge lest you be judged. That is the most used verse today, and I'm talking about the churches. Maybe not this church. I'm pretty sure most people here don't think that way. But there have been some churches that I've pastored or spoken at that think that way. And there's some of your relatives think that way that have gone to church. Okay, so we have to look at the context, right? Whenever we take one verse from the Bible, we always have to look at its context to see what Jesus is saying, see what God is trying to reveal to us. We can't take just one verse and paint a broad, brush over it, make a blanket statement, but we have to look at the context. What is Jesus really saying about judgment here? In Matthew 6:2, he's really talking about, if you're going to give money to the poor, if you give alms, right? Don't let people know. Don't be a hypocrite. Don't be like the hypocrites. Matthew 6:5, if you're going to pray, don't pray in public. Go in your inner room. That's where it counts, you and God. You don't have to make a big spectacle out of your prayer and promote yourself. You've been a hypocrite. He says the word hypocrite. In Matthew 6:16, talks about fasting. Don't be like the hypocrites who fast, and when they have hunger pains, they groan. Let everybody know they're fasting because they're so spiritual, right? It's a hypocrite. So Jesus is condemning hypocritical but not righteous judgment. Hypocritical judgment involves, according to Matthew 7:1-5, judging but thinking you will not be judged. Thinking you shouldn't be judged by your own standards, verse 2, 7:2. Evaluating others without evaluating yourself, verse 3. Correcting others before correcting yourself, verse 4 and 5. Lenski, who writes commentaries, exegetical commentaries, which a lot of pastors use, he says, what he forbids is self-righteous, hypocritical judging, which is false and calls down God's judgment on itself. Here's some nuggets. Ask the postmodernist questions that will help him realize what Jesus meant was that being discriminating and critical is necessary, but being hypocritical is wrong. If I see my good friend being drunk at a party, am I going to judge him? Of course. I'm going to judge him as being incapable of driving home. I'm going to take the keys away from him. You know, will I invest money in a company that's broke? Of course not. I'm going to judge that that's a bad investment. Judging is necessary. It's condemning and being hypocritical in your judgments that is wrong. I think that's the line that Christians cross sometimes, is that we become condemning, right? Instead of judging correctly. And then what the world does, the world takes that and says that Christian who does that represents all Christians. Okay, next word. Respect. Respect has two different meanings in at least 80% of the world. To adults, this means giving due consideration to others. To youth, this means wholeheartedly approving other people's beliefs or lifestyle from your heart and not your mind. I was working at the human resource department, hiring Christian counselors, therapists for a Christian company that I was working. It was in La Mirada about 12 years ago. One of the young guys was a top student from an evangelical school, top student. I interviewed this guy. He was so arrogant. He's him being Christian. My job was to discern if these people are Christian and to discern whether they use their therapeutic techniques were biblical. And if they were, and they had the skills, my job was to hire them for my company so that they would have a job, my company would be successful. I remember this guy, there's a lot of things he said, but for the sake of time, I remember him just berating my company. Look, I'm interviewing this guy I'm going to give him a job, and he was berating my company. He was saying, oh, you guys are all these like conservative Christians. And I remember him saying this. He goes, because he was reading our standards, right? And he was like, you guys are like, he goes, I would never be like one of you guys. And he said, I couldn't believe, he said, I would never stand out on the street corners and evangelize like you guys do. First of all, he doesn't know what we do on our free time. He's never seen us evangelize out in a corner or not. But he said that. And I was thinking to myself, look, I'm pretty sure I read in the book of Acts and Jonah that God told them to go evangelize. I'm pretty sure. I might not do that in today's world. It might not be the appropriate means of evangelizing. But if God tells me to do it, I'll do it. Right? So there's this idea that he's a Christian, but he doesn't really adhere to this thing. He said a lot more things that were off. So I hired him, but I fired him the next day. I don't say that with disrespect towards him, but his whole thing was that you people are so disrespectful, right? That's what he was saying. And there's this thing called privatization, right? We need to privatize our religion. You hear politicians say this a lot. Don't evangelize out there. Do not evangelize out there. You have to keep it. As long as you keep it within the church, it's okay. But as soon as you take it out into the marketplace, you're disrespecting people with different beliefs. You're not accepting their beliefs as equal to your own. Therefore, keep your religion private to yourself. You can do whatever you want behind closed doors, but don't bring it outside. Pretty sure that the Bible doesn't teach that. But that impacts us. That impacts us in the church because I hear people telling me, don't go out there to evangelize. Acceptance. 80% of the world, this means embracing people for who they are, not necessarily for what they do. I'm gonna go fast now. To youth, this means endorsing and praising others for their beliefs and for their lifestyle choices. There is no separating a person's actions from their being. So, okay, I'm going to talk about a very controversial subject, right? I don't like to talk about a subject, but let's say issue of homosexuality, right? I can disagree with homosexuality, but as a Christian, God commands me to love you. So you can say that you have an orientation. I don't have to agree with that, but I need to love you. I need to embrace you, and I did. Dave Seattle, I had 2 roommates in San Francisco that were that. I served them. When my roommate, had problems, I took him to the hospital. I found him a job. He was dressed as a woman when I first met him. When we were finished after 4 years, he was no longer dressed as a woman. I served him. I loved him. I embraced him, but I didn't agree with him. But what the world is saying is that every time a Christian says, I don't agree with homosexuality, they're saying they hate homosexuals. See how there's no separating between the person's action and who they are? And then the LGBT takes that, runs with it. I'm not talking about homosexual people. I'm talking about people who are in the LGBT. They're 2 different things. LGBT, by the way, are run by a lot of powerful people who are not homosexuals. They just have an agenda. A lot of homosexuals that I drove into the Castro in San Francisco, they're homosexuals, but they really are trying to figure out their spirituality. They talk about heaven and hell. I know that because my roommate was in that. But what I'm saying is that the LGBT has an agenda, right? And so what happens is they take things like this. Westboro Baptist Church, Topeka, Kansas. These people go to funerals of military people who died, and they say these people deserve to die. We hate, look, we're talking about the world, so language we might not use in church, but I'm going to, this is the world. I'm not giving you something that you probably haven't seen on TV, right? Thank God for dead, they'll say, we hate fags, right? And so I am 100% sure that God has not called us to do that. And yet, this church, Westboro Baptist Church, say they represent the Bible. And so the LGBT takes that, they run with it, and they promote all Christians as being that. That's why there are a lot of people that are mad at Christians. Because they're saying Christians hate the person. No, we hate the sin, right? You've heard that. We hate the sin, but we love the person. Okay, I'm going to go on. Here's number 6. 80% of the world, and then we're done. To adults, this means that everyone has a right to be treated justly under the law. To youth, this means that everyone has a right to do whatever is best, no rules, no consequences for themselves, and not to be judged. There's a New York case. I was taking this class called Culture and Cultural Diversity in UC Irvine. Professor comes up. Professor is about 35 years old, represents postmodern. He's talking about this New York case where state of New York was suing this mother from Africa who for child abuse. Why? Because she had slit her child's face from one side to the other, right? Child abuse. But the defendant was saying, no, she's from Africa. People do that in Africa as a beauty mark. That's their truth. That defense helped them win the case. That's relativism. My professor agreed with that. There is no grand story, right? There is no grand story. It's okay for people to slit their child's faces from one side to another because it's really a beauty mark. If you believe in a grand story, I'm pretty sure that is some type of abuse. Last one. This means to adults freedom. This means being free to do what you know you should. To youth, this means being able to do anything you want to do. Facebook friend. Charles Manson died about 3 years ago. Facebook friend who purports to be Christian, says he's a Christian. He says, question for you guys, Facebook friend. Is Charles Manson going to hell or heaven? See, his whole thing, him being a postmodern, his whole thing is if anyone puts he's going to hell, then you're very judgmental and you're a bigot. So everybody was afraid because they know how he thinks. And so nobody really put anything to that effect. It's, oh, well, it's up to God. It's. And then at the end, he finishes and he says, I think God is gracious. I'm pretty sure Charles Manson is probably in heaven. We don't have a right to be discriminating in postmodernism. We don't have a right to make non-hypocritical judgments. We have to accept, respect, tolerate, and respect people as our own, their beliefs as equal to our own. And with that, I think I'm done. 10:15. God bless you. See you guys.